That morning started like any other. Jeremy Thompson sipped his coffee, glanced over his lush garden, and felt a rare kind of peace. The sun filtered through the leaves of his cherry blossom tree. Butterflies hovered above rows of zinnias and wild lavender. The garden was his masterpiece, one he built with his own hands, not a landscaping company. It was the pride of Maple Ridge Drive. By noon, that peace was gone. Jeremy returned from the hardware store to find destruction. His garden ripped apart. Flowers trampled, plants uprooted. Gnomes shattered in the soil like broken promises. A yellow-orange tag was stapled to his porch rail. The kind the HOA used for citations. Unauthorized vegetation removal per section for B. Aesthetic Uniformity Clause. He blinked at it, stunned. Section 4B. That was never enforced. He'd read the guidelines front to back. No vote had been held. No warning issued. And the landscaping company that did it. Nowhere to be seen. His neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. A few stood awkwardly at the sidewalk, unsure whether to speak. Mrs. Crowley, who lived 2 houses down, muttered under her breath. "You're not the first. They got my fountain last week." Jeremy clenched the citation in his hand. Not the first. That night, he walked the neighborhood. He noticed the signs bare patches of dirt where flower beds used to be, half-finished lawns, decorative stones missing. One homeowner had a koi pond drained and filled with mulch. The HOA had issued no public notice. No one was consulted. When Jeremy called the HOA office, he got voicemail. When he emailed, he got an automated reply. When he tried to attend the scheduled meeting, it had been canceled due to staffing issues. That's when he started asking questions in person. What he uncovered wasn't just a pattern, it was a campaign. "You heard about Karen's wind chimes," said one neighbor. "They fined her $300. Said it violated the noise harmony clause. Then they made her tear down her birdhouse too. They told me my ivy was invasive," another neighbor added. "It's been there for 9 years. But it wasn't happening to everyone. It was only happening to homes that weren't part of a private landscaping deal the HOA had quietly arranged." Jeremy's instincts, sharpened by a background in municipal auditing, kicked in. He requested financial transparency under the HOA's own bylaws. Carol Vickers, the board president, responded in writing. HOA financial matters are managed internally and not open to non-board member scrutiny. That wasn't just a red flag, it was a siren. Late that evening, Jeremy stood over the mess that used to be his garden. He stared at the spot where his daughter's favorite sunflower once grew. He picked up one of the broken gnome pieces and whispered, "They want war." He opened his laptop and started digging. 2 hours later, he found something buried deep in the HOA's digital newsletter archive, a tiny footnote from a board meeting 6 months ago. It mentioned a new discretionary budget for exterior enhancements. No dollar amount, no breakdown, just one vague line, quickly passed by a vote of only 3 board members. Jeremy's pulse quickened. It wasn't just about his garden anymore. Jeremy couldn't sleep. His mind spun in circles around one glaring detail. Why would the HOA be funneling payments to a landscaping company registered to Carol Vickers' own home? That wasn't just suspicious, it was personal gain. Possibly illegal. The next morning, Jeremy skipped work and began mapping everything out. He laid out HOA newsletters, citations from neighbors, screenshots of HOA bylaws, and Google Maps images of every affected property. The pattern wasn't random, it was strategic. Only homes with non-standard decorations or personalized landscaping had been targeted. Homes with Carol's allies. Untouched, immaculate, even improved. He highlighted a new goal in red ink at the top of his board. Follow the money. His first stop was Beth Morgan, a retired teacher 2 blocks down who'd once shown off her homegrown herb garden at a community potluck. Jeremy remembered it, vividly: basil mint. Rosemary all wiped out weeks ago. "I thought I was the only one," Beth said, pouring him a cup of herbal tea. "They told me it was a violation of Section 3C, but when I asked to appeal, they sent a cease and desist." Beth still had the notice. And the invoice she received after the removal, $575 charged to her HOA dues for remedial landscaping. The contractor, Green Pines Outdoor Solutions. The same company Jeremy had found on the vendor list. The next 2 days, Jeremy knocked on doors. He spoke to 10 homeowners, then 15, then over 2 dozen. 17 had been cited for non-yards, 14 had been fined. All had paid Green Pines, involuntarily, through their HOA dues, and in every case, Carol Vickers had signed the work order. But what finally cracked it wide open was an overheard conversation at the neighborhood park. "I told Carol she owed me for the pool, guys," said HOA board member Greg Langston to another man. "She said it's coming out of the discretionary fund. No one's gonna notice." Jeremy, sitting 2 benches away with a book he wasn't reading, froze. Discretionary fund. The same vague fund mentioned in the footnote. That night, he called Dylan, the tech-savvy teen whose mom had her picket fence removed by the HOA without warning. Dylan had a talent for getting around digital walls. "I need access to anything the board thought was hidden," Jeremy said. "Emails, meeting minutes, vendor payments, whatever you can get." Dylan grinned. "Give me a night." By morning, Jeremy had a thumb drive in his hand and an inbox full of firepower. There were PDFs of expense reports, scanned receipts, email threads between board members joking about using the budget while we can, and a private conversation where Carol instructed the treasurer to run Green Pines payments through the general maintenance ledger. It was worse than Jeremy imagined. Carol wasn't just spending HOA funds without consent, she was laundering them through fake invoices, funneling money to a company tied directly to her address, and the discretionary fund. It had ballooned from $10,000 to over $85,000 in under a year with no community vote. But Jeremy didn't get angry, he got ready. Jeremy kept his head down in the days that followed, but every step he took felt heavier. The documents were damning corruption, deception, and targeted punishments, all tied back to the HOA board. But if Carol had already planned for a challenger, he couldn't afford to make a single misstep. He decided to test the waters before going public. One afternoon, he visited Terrence Liu, a quiet man known for trimming his hedges every Sunday morning like clockwork. A few months ago, his bird bath disappeared overnight, followed by a fine. Jeremy shared a few notes carefully. Terrence's eyes widened. "So it's not just me." Jeremy leaned in. "I think it goes deeper than aesthetics. I think they're profiting off of us." Terrence hesitated. Then he nodded. "Follow me." In his garage, Terrence pulled out a dusty folder. Inside were old meeting notes he'd once kept when he briefly served on a subcommittee. Scribbled across one margin in pencil were the words "discretionary Vickers, direct sign-off, no vote. She changed the rules after I resigned," Terrence said. "Said it was for administrative efficiency." Jeremy took a photo of the note. Piece by piece, the web was tightening, but not everyone wanted to talk. When Jeremy approached Donna, a newer homeowner, she looked panicked and rushed inside. Later that night, he received an anonymous message through Facebook. "Stop digging, you're making it worse. They always find out." The next day, a citation appeared on his lawn. It accused him of unauthorized use of decorative stones. Decorative stones, the same ones that had been in his garden for 3 years. Jeremy tore the notice down and laughed out loud, but it wasn't humor. It was disbelief. The retaliation had started. But if they wanted a fight, he wasn't backing down. He just needed a smarter plan. He waited until nightfall, then walked 3 blocks over to see Mrs. Emma Grillia, retired paralegal known for baking cinnamon rolls and quietly suing her last HOA into bankruptcy. "You got a second?" he asked her on the porch. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Come inside." Jeremy laid out the documents. The payments, the bogus citations, the budget trail. Emma didn't blink. "They've been skimming," she said plainly. "And if this discretionary fund wasn't voted on, it violates your HOA charter, and probably state statutes too. So what do I do?" Emma smiled. "You build a case, son. But you don't just drop it on people. You stage it. Make it public. Make it dramatic. You need witnesses, proof, outrage, and you need the neighborhood watching." Jeremy paused. "Like a show." "Exactly. They like to operate in shadows. So you shine a damn spotlight." By the time he left Emma's house, a plan had taken shape, one that wouldn't just expose the fraud, but make the entire neighborhood see exactly who was responsible. It wouldn't be an angry confrontation. It would be a performance they'd never forget. Jeremy knew he had little time left. That email, cold and deliberate, meant the board had officially marked him as a threat. They were done with warnings. His yard, his home, his credibility, they were next on the chopping block. And he had to act before they buried him in fines. Or worse. He started with the most obvious move: make copies. Dozens of them. Flash drives, cloud backups, even printed files hidden in a shoebox under his daughter's old crib. He wasn't just protecting evidence, he was making sure if he went down, the truth didn't go with him. Then came the harder part, pulling the numbers apart, line by line. Jeremy spent sleepless nights poring through Dylan's hacked archives. Every receipt, email, and invoice was cross-checked against bank statements from the HOA's quarterly reports. Something wasn't right with the fund totals. The discretionary budget, originally listed at $10,000, ballooned to $85,000 in just over 8 months. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The line items were coded vaguely, with entries like exterior optimization, beautification projects, and community comfort enhancements. But when Jeremy traced the vendor numbers attached, it led to strange places. A home spa service booked under Greg Langston's wife's name, a gourmet catering order delivered not to the HOA office, but to Carol's residence on the same day as her birthday, lawn care bills for properties that weren't even in the HOA's jurisdiction. They were laundering money through the HOA like it was their private checking account. Jeremy gathered everything in a single, massive file labeled, simply, HOA Ledger, Unmasked. But just as he was saving it, his email pinged. A message. No subject. No body. Just one attachment. A photo. It was his garden. Taken minutes ago. A man in a neon vest stood next to it, shovel in hand, looking at the camera. They were watching him. Jeremy bolted out the front door, but the street was empty. His heart pounded as he scanned the darkness, searching for signs of movement. Nothing. But now it was personal. And it was escalating. He called Dylan and Emma. They both agreed this wasn't the time to wait. Jeremy's plan to expose everything had to happen now. Do it loud, Emma said. Do it fast, Dylan nodded. And do it where they can't cut you off. By the following afternoon, flyers appeared across Maple Ridge Drive. Community movie night Thursday, 7 p.m. Free popcorn. Big reveal. Jeremy rented a projector, set up a massive white tarp on his garage, and prepared the slideshow. But this wouldn't be a dry spreadsheet breakdown. It would be a cinematic unraveling of everything the HOA board thought they'd buried, set to music, timed with drama, and backed by irrefutable proof. Neighbors grew curious. Whispers spread. Even some board members RSVP'd under fake names. Jeremy knew because Dylan had hacked the Google form. But Jeremy still had one card left to play. He needed to hook something no one could ignore. He returned to the archives, one last time. And found it. A PDF invoice dated just 2 weeks prior. Green Pines Outdoor Solutions billed $4,200 for emergency soil correction at a location listed only as Lot 12, a executive allocation. Jeremy's property. They had already paid themselves to destroy his garden again. Thursday evening arrived, and with it, a strange tension settled over Maple Ridge Drive. Lawn chairs lined the sidewalks. Kids chased each other with glow sticks while adults milled around Jeremy's driveway, curious and whispering. A large, white tarp flapped gently in the warm breeze, fastened to the front of Jeremy's garage. A popcorn machine hummed near the porch. Jeremy stood beside it, looking calm but inside. His nerves were coiled tight. At exactly 7:15 p.m., he stepped forward and tapped the mic. Thanks for coming, neighbors. I know you were expecting a movie tonight, but what I'm about to show you is real, and it's happening right here, under our noses. A few chuckles rose from the crowd, but Jeremy didn't smile. He nodded to Dylan, who was manning the projector. The screen lit up. It began, innocently enough, a photo of Jeremy's garden before the destruction. Then came another after the HOA's correction. Groans and murmurs echoed through the crowd. Then the next slide hit. Side-by-side invoices. One for emergency soil correction, billed at $4,200. The next slide zoomed in on the signature, Greg Langston. Jeremy didn't stop. He moved swiftly through a timeline of payments and board decisions, each more alarming than the last. Photos of luxury catering receipts. Green Pines payment logs showing services rendered at 9 HOA properties. A lawn care bill that included a property address traced to Carol Vickers' vacation home. I'm not saying mistakes were made, Jeremy said, his voice steady. I'm saying we've been robbed. The crowd murmured louder. Phones lit up as neighbors snapped pictures of the screen. Then came the final slide. Emails from Carol and Greg discussing silencing disruptive elements. Followed by the line, handle Thompson's yard next, he's stirring up too much noise. Gasps. Someone cursed under their breath. Jeremy let the silence sit for a beat, before speaking again. You're not just looking at stolen money. You're looking at an abuse of power, hidden behind paperwork, cloaked in fake citations, and disguised as improvements. And if they did this to me, to my garden, ask yourself, who's next? At the back of the crowd, Carol Vickers stepped forward, flanked by 2 other board members. Her face was a mask of forced calm. "This is out of order," she said, voice tight. "You're distributing private board information. This is a violation of the HOA confidentiality agreement." Jeremy turned toward her. "The agreement says, homeowners have a right to financial transparency. This isn't private. It's public money. Our money, and we have the right to know how it's being used." The crowd turned to Carol. All eyes were on her. Then a hand shot up. "Terrence Liu. I motion for a formal audit of the HOA's discretionary budget," he said. Beth Morgan stood up. "I second that motion." Carol faltered. This isn't a board meeting?" "No," Jeremy replied, "but the vote of the people still matters." The crowd began clapping, some timidly, others with growing force. Carol turned and walked away, but the damage had been done. Jeremy stared at the printed email in disbelief. Fast-track foreclosure. 2 chilling words with the power to append everything. He'd built. His heart raced as he read the conversation between Greg Langston and a legal firm on retainer by the HOA. The message was clear. They were planning to drown him in legal red tape, fine after fine, until he either broke or lost his home. So this was how the HOA fought back. Not with arguments, with annihilation. The next morning, Jeremy stepped outside and immediately saw the retaliation in motion. 3 new citations were stuck to his mailbox. One for discoloration of driveway concrete, another for unapproved lighting fixtures, and the third unbelievably for failure to maintain appropriate mailbox height. His mailbox hadn't changed in 10 years. He snapped photos of all 3 and posted them to the Maple Ridge neighborhood group online with a simple caption, "They're coming after me. I won't be the last." The post exploded by noon. Over 50 comments poured in from neighbors who had quietly received similar citations in the last few days. Fines ranging from $50 to $800. Threats of liens, and in one case, a shut-off notice for HOA-provided irrigation. Carol tried to contain it. She released a statement on the HOA's website claiming the citations were part of a pre-planned neighborhood maintenance initiative, but no one was buying it anymore. The news spread faster than even Jeremy expected. A local independent journalist reached out for an interview after seeing screenshots of the projection night go viral on social media. Within 2 days, a video interview titled "Homeowner Fights Back Against HOA Tyranny" was climbing in views. Meanwhile, the anonymous tips started flowing in. One from a former HOA accountant, who quit a year ago under suspicious ethical pressure. She emailed Jeremy directly with files that showed how the discretionary fund had been split into smaller, less noticeable payouts -micro-laundering. Another tip came with photos. Greg Langston getting a full patio remodel during work hours. The invoice charged to community seating, beautification. Jeremy now had enough evidence to choke the board in paperwork. But it wasn't just about taking them down anymore. It was about stopping them from taking him out first. He met with Emma Greeley again, who had already begun drafting a legal defense. With her help, he sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA citing abuse of authority, harassment, and financial misconduct. He filed a formal motion for a third-party audit and even notified the state's Housing Oversight Board. But the biggest blow came that Friday afternoon. To board members, one of them visibly shaken resigned on the spot. And the second didn't go quietly. He leaked more. This time, it was a board group chat log. And it was damning. Greg had written, "Let's drown Thompson in violations until he folds. If he wants a war, we'll make it legal hell." Carol responded, "He won't last. They never do." Jeremy printed that message. He hung it on his window like a trophy. The war wasn't over. But he was no longer on the defensive. Jeremy held the resignation letter in one hand and the cryptic warning in the other. "You made enemies." It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Carol Vickers might have stepped down, but she wasn't going quietly. And she wasn't alone. The audit hearing was scheduled for Saturday morning in the community center. Word had spread, and neighbors who had once ignored HOA meetings now lined up outside. Gripping notepads, screenshots, and questions. The once silent community was awake and furious. Inside, a panel of 3 independent auditors hired by the residents sat at the front, flanked by folding tables stacked with HOA records. Jeremy had submitted his evidence early, but as the meeting began, a surprise came from an unlikely place. Greg Langston stood to speak. "I'd like to address the board," he said, sweat glistening on his forehead. "It's true we made errors in judgment. But I was just following Carol's lead. She ran everything. I didn't know how deep it went. Jeremy narrowed his eyes. Greg's tone wasn't apologetic. It was rehearsed. He was trying to shift the blame before the floor caved in, but the auditors weren't buying it. They began presenting the documents: misappropriated funds, fake invoices, duplicate payments to Green Pines Outdoor Solutions. Then came the bombshell bank transfers leading directly to a personal savings account under Greg's name. Would you care to explain this? One auditor asked. Greg froze. Silence followed. Jeremy stood. I can. That account was opened for months before the discretionary fund was even introduced. This wasn't an accident. This was a setup. A ripple of gasps moved through the room, then came shouting. Neighbors turned on Greg. A woman cried out that she'd paid over $3,000 in fines for a swing set her grandkids used. Another claimed she had to take out a loan to keep her home after repeated landscaping citations. Greg crumbled under the pressure and bolted for the exit, but not before one final twist. Dylan, who had been sitting quietly with his laptop, intercepted him at the door. You might want to stay, he said, tapping the screen. I just received a new dump of board emails. They're time-stamped last night. The screen displayed a message from Carol to Greg, sent from a burner account. If this audit goes through, take the fall. I'll make sure you're compensated. We can't both sink. The crowd erupted. The auditors adjourned to review the final findings. In under an hour, they returned with a unanimous recommendation: immediate suspension of all current board activities, appointment of a temporary oversight committee, full financial audit forwarded to state housing authorities. Greg was escorted out of the building. Jeremy didn't smile. Not yet. Outside, reporters were already waiting. Microphones thrust forward, questions flying. Are you planning to sue? What's next for Maple Ridge? Will the HOA dissolve? Jeremy answered, the only way he could. We're going to rebuild, but first, we need to fix what they tried to destroy: our trust in each other. Later that evening, neighbors gathered in Jeremy's yard. No one asked permission. No one needed to. They brought gardening tools, spare plants, gnome figurines, and enough soil to restore what had been taken. They worked into the night. Under porch lights and moonbeams, the sun rose slowly over Maple Ridge Drive, casting golden light across a yard once trampled into ruin. Now, it bloomed. Jeremy stood in the middle of his garden, new flowers swaying in the breeze. Fresh mulch soft beneath his boots, and a circle of ceramic gnomes lined up like silent sentries reclaiming sacred ground. His neighbors had stayed, long past dark the night before, planting, laughing, and sharing stories of the chaos they'd all survived. But what lingered now wasn't fear, it was freedom. For the first time in months, Jeremy didn't wake to a fresh citation. No orange tags. No letters. No hidden threats in white envelopes. The temporary oversight committee had frozen all HOA enforcement actions. An emergency vote was already underway to elect a completely new board, one with transparency rules, rotating member terms, and, most importantly, community oversight. Jeremy had declined to run. He didn't want power. He just wanted peace. That morning, as he watered a row of marigolds, Terrence Liu approached, holding a box. They told me you might want this, he said. Inside was the final audit report, thick-bound, and full of damning evidence. At the top was a red sticker labeled, submitted to State Housing Oversight, pending civil investigation. Jeremy took it without a word. There was closure in that wait. Later that day, he walked it to the neighborhood's small library annex, where a glass display case stood near the entrance. The librarian, smiling, unlocked it. They placed the audit file on the top shelf beside a plaque that read, "The HOA fund that tried to silence a community, and the garden that spoke louder." It wasn't just about what Carol and Greg had done. It was about making sure it never happened again, not here, not anywhere. As Jeremy stepped outside, he saw Dylan leaning against a tree, fiddling with his phone. Any updates on our runaway HOA queen? Jeremy asked. Dylan nodded grimly. Yep, Carol Vickers just filed paperwork in another state. New HOA, under the name Evergreen Unity. Already signed a private landscaping contract. Guess who with? Jeremy didn't have to guess. Green Pines. But get this, Dylan continued. I sent the audit to the Evergreen Community's public forum. Anonymous drop. 1 hour later, it was being shared in every post. Looks like the seeds are already sprouting. Jeremy smiled. Good. Let her find out what it feels like to be the one exposed for once. The months that followed brought more than just garden growth. Maple Ridge changed. Color returned to the house's painted doors. Flower beds, handmade birdhouses. People stopped fearing the rules and started enjoying their homes again. The new HOA board, led by Beth Morgan and 2 others, made every meeting public and streamed online. Every budget item was posted monthly, no more secrets, no more surprises. As spring turned into summer, Jeremy's story gained attention beyond their sleepy neighborhood. A podcast series picked it up. A community blog interviewed him. He was even invited to speak at a regional homeowner conference on HOA oversight and homeowner rights. But Jeremy never lost sight of what truly mattered. One warm Saturday, as he sat in his yard with his daughter planting sunflowers, she asked, "Why did they try to tear all this down?" He thought about it for a long moment before answering. Because they thought they could. But they forgot one thing: people grow roots, and when you try to rip them up, they fight back.